Today we are going to start to talk about digestion of proteins and lipids in humans. We are going to start to talk about digestion of protein, and we are going to start in the mouth, what happens in the mouth. Later we'll move to what happens in the stomach, and lastly what happens in the small intestine. So let's start. So the first thing that you have to do, you have to take the food and put it into the mouth. The taking in of food into the mouth is what we call ingestion. Now, after you have taken the food into the mouth, you have to chew that food in order to break it into smaller particles. And we also have saliva in the mouth that helps to soften the food, but the saliva doesn't have any enzyme that will digest protein. Therefore, no chemical digestion of protein is occurring in the mouth. So after the teeth have chewed the food into smaller particles, saliva has softened the food. That food will be rolled into a small ball-like structure called the bolline. After that, that bolline will pass through the pharynx into the esophagus. In the esophagus, the food moves in a wave-like manner called peristalsis. In the stomach, the wall of the stomach is having gastric glands. Those gastric glands, they produce what we call gastric juice. The gastric juice is containing an inactive pepsin called pepsinogen, and it is having hydrochloric acid. The hydrochloric acid will convert the inactive pepsinogen into pepsin. The pepsin will convert protein into peptides and peptones. And also, the churning movement of the stomach also help to mix the food into a watering kind. And after that, that kind will move from the stomach into the small intestine. Mind you, the food moving from the mouth into the stomach, they are in the form of what we call bolline. But the food moving from the stomach into the small intestine, they are in the form of what we call chyme. And the food moving from the stomach into the small intestine, it is acidic in nature. And the enzymes in the small intestine, they work best in an alkaline environment. That means that food coming from the stomach, which is acidic, when they enter into the small intestine, specifically the first part of the small intestine called duodenum, the enzymes in there, they will not be able to act on it in that acidic form. Therefore, that food has to be neutralized in order for the enzymes in there to act on it. So what happens? The bile that is being produced by the liver, which is stored in the gallbladder, will be released into the duodenum, the first part of the small intestine. In there, it will neutralize the acidic content of the food coming from the stomach. As we have it on this slide, bile neutralizes the acidic chyme. The pancreas produce what we call the pancreatic juice. That pancreatic juice, it contains a lot of enzymes, but we are just going to talk about the enzymes concerned with digestion of protein. So in that pancreatic juice, which has to be released through the pancreatic duct into the duodenum, it contains an enzyme called trypsin, chymotrypsin, etc. The trypsin and chymotrypsin will help to convert protein into peptides and peptones. Mind you, we have pepsin, which converts protein into peptides and peptones in the stomach, but not all of the proteins will be converted into peptides and peptones in the stomach. Those proteins which were not converted into peptides and peptones in the stomach, they will be converted into peptides and peptones by trypsin and chymotrypsin, etc., in the small intestine. That food will move into the second part of the small intestine called jejunum. The wall of the jejunum, it has an intestinal glands. These glands will produce what we call, it also contains a lot of enzymes, but we are going to focus on enzymes that are of protease. That means enzymes that can digest protein. But we just have one enzyme in there that will digest protein, that is erepsin. So the erepsin present in the intestinal juice will convert the peptides and peptones into amino acids. After the protein has been broken down into amino acid, this amino acid will be absorbed into the intestinal wall by active transport using sodium dependent carrier protein, and they move from the wall of the small intestine into the blood vessels by facilitated diffusion, and they will be transported through the hepatic portal vein into the liver, where they have to be processed. Next on our slide is lipid digestion. That means we are going to talk about how lipid is being digested, and we are going to talk about the mouth in here, what happens there, and we are going to talk about the stomach on this slide. So the first thing that has to happen, just like any other food, that you have to take the food into the mouth. In the mouth, the saliva is having what we call the salivary lipase, that will start the breakdown of lipid into fatty acid and glycerol. But mind you, it will start to break down the bone, but not all of the bones will be breaking down. And that saliva also help to soften the food. Then later, the tongue has to roll the food into a small ball-like structures called the bolli, and that food has to move through the pharynx into the esophagus. From the esophagus, it will get into the stomach. In the stomach, the wall of the stomach is having gastric gland that will secrete gastric juice. That gastric juice, it contains an enzyme called gastric lipase. The gastric lipase will continue the breaking down of this lipid into fatty acid and glycerol. After that, the churning movement of the stomach will convert the food into a watering kind. That kind will move from the stomach into the small intestine, specifically the first part of the small intestine called the duodenum. So in the small intestine, the enzymes in there, they work best in an alkaline environment, and the food coming is acidic. Therefore, the enzymes will not be able to act on it. The liver produce bile, which is stored in the gallbladder. That bile will be released into the duodenum, the first part of the stomach. The bile will neutralize the acidic content of the food coming from the stomach, so that enzymes in there will act on it in order to break it down into absorbable particles. The bile, it performs two functions. One, it will help to neutralize the acidic content of the food coming from the stomach, so that enzymes in the small intestine will be able to act on it. Two, it will help to emulsify fat. That means it will break down large fat droplets into small fat droplets in order to increase the surface area for the enzymes to act on it. After the bile has broken down the large fat droplet into small fat droplets, the pancreas will produce what we call the pancreatic juice. That pancreatic juice, it contains pancreatic lipase. The pancreatic lipase will break down the small fat droplets into fatty acids and monoglycerides. After that, the fatty acids and monoglycerides will be absorbed into the bloodstream. So now let's talk about absorption of the fatty acid and the monoglycerides. The fatty acids and monoglycerides will combine with bile salts in order to form what we call mixture. This mixture will enter into the intestinal cells by absorption. In the intestinal cells, the fatty acid and monoglyceride will form again what we call triacylglycerol. That is the lipid we are talking about, in which they were breaking down into fatty acid and monoglycerides. So this fatty acid and monoglyceride will combine again to form what we call triacylglycerol. In the intestinal cells, the triacylglycerol will combine with a protein in order to form what we call chylomicron. Of the villi. The chylomicron will not enter into the bloodstream as it happens in the case of carbohydrate and protein when we are talking about their digestion, in which they have to enter into the bloodstream, travels to the liver. The chylomicron is too large to enter into the hepatic portal system. Instead, it enters into the lacteals of the villi. From the lacteal of the villi, it will enter into the lymphatic system. We have a large lymph vessel called the thoracic duct. So it will enter into the thoracic duct. From the thoracic duct, it will enter into the bloodstream, where it has to be transported to the heart, and the heart now will pump it to the rest of the body. So this is the summary in which the protein has to be breaking down into amino acid, that is the end product of it, and the lipid, it has to be breaking down into fatty acid and monoglycerides, that is the end product of the lipid. So if you are being asked what is the monomer of protein, it is amino acid. When they talk about monomer, the mono means one. But in here, the monomers is talking about the least form in which protein is being broken down to. Therefore, the answer will be amino acid. And for lipid, the answer will be fatty acids and monoglyceride. And the absorption of the lipid and the protein, they occur in the small intestine, although they have to use various means for them to be absorbed into the bloodstream. Thank you.